A very good morning to everyone, and a very special word of thanks to Fataza for the opportunity to address you today on a very important topic, and that is breaking the barriers, how COVID is breaking the barriers and the new trends and the new challenges that we face for agriculture, agribusiness, and the agro-food system as we go forward in our country. But we also have to look at what's happening globally, because this pandemic is going to have a major disruption in the whole food system in the world. So I want to take you through a couple of major points today. Firstly, to look at observations and learning of COVID-19 on agriculture, specifically on the global impact and developments, the domestic impact and developments, what we've been doing when we've been engaging with governments, and that engagement is ongoing. In fact, it's even picking up now. And then also the way forward for South African agriculture. And then conclude with a take-home message. So we've seen globally that agriculture is now in remarkably uncertain territory, although things are stabilizing a bit. But we've seen major disruptions in supply and demand. We've seen bigger surpluses and shortages across the world. From the demand side, we've seen changing consumer patterns on food spend, more health foods, in some cases, in the poorer communities, back to staple foods like white maize meal, etc. Protectionist policies and trade restrictions have come in rice-producing countries like Cambodia and Vietnam, and Russian wheat exports, logistical and supply chain challenges, disruptions in India, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa also a very good example, often around the movement of products through sea transport. The reefer containers for our fruit exports availability has been a problem. Equipment issues in SA ports, and in labor challenges, for example, in ports. So food waste has been quite bad amid closures of restaurants, especially in your first world countries like USA, Belgium, and Canada, and all of Europe. And in labor shortages due to lockdown, especially again in first world countries where you have migratory labor moving from country to country, picking fruit, for example. And then your agro-processing workplace closures due to COVID-19 cases. And we've seen these in terms of your meatpacking institutions or processing plants in the United States, especially. The one positive thing with this crisis is that there are fairly solid supplies of global grains in the market. So there's no need really for export restrictions in terms of rice, wheat, and maize. So we're in a pretty healthy situation in terms of generally of supply. So there's not a major food security risk in terms of availability. It's the distribution and the affordability which has now become the big problem. But we've also seen that the coronavirus has had a major impact on globalization, and it will probably not kill it off, but it's definitely going to be a big shakeup, and that we're going to see a different trend of greater localization coming in. The graph on the left-hand side indicates to you the imports and exports, how they've declined from the 0 point and decreased both imports and exports roughly by 20% to different countries and different regions of the world. And this is for China alone, and this is only for January and February. Obviously, as the pandemic increased, you would have seen further contraction of imports and exports. So the whole move is going to be towards greater localization. We are already in conversation with governments around this. But that also puts pressure on us because we're a net exporter of agricultural products. Our fruits, maize, wool, wines, etc. So we then have to find markets for these products in a market where it's becoming more unfriendly to export to. So these are the type of challenges that we will have to look at. Now, South Africa recorded a massive trade deficit of 35 billion in April 2020. And despite a drop in imports as well, and exports fell by 55% to the value of 65 billion. Now, this is primarily through motor vehicles and minerals that haven't been exported. Fortunately, most of our agricultural products could still be exported, although there was a holdup in terms of wine, wool, your non-food exports in the process. In a way, South African agriculture has not been as hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, we were in a constrained environment before the COVID-19 pandemic. We had 7 quarters of negative growth, so we were properly in a recession. And this was due to 2 major years of droughts, actually longer period, and then also biosecurity issues like foot and mouth disease, etc. And we predicted, even in December, January, before COVID, we predicted a recovery in 2020 because we could foresee better grain harvests and fruit harvests, etc. So we currently still estimate a 10% year-on-year recovery in South African agricultural GDP for 2020. Yes, there are some risks, but our maize crop is the biggest, second biggest crop ever, roughly 15.5 million tons. The biggest citrus crop ever, and it's big. Big problem is to get it out. The table grape industry, I think, had the second biggest exports year. So, and with the rand being having depreciated substantially, your earnings in rands are obviously high if you're exporting into the global market. So the positive, at least, is that South African agriculture will grow. Just the past quarter, it grew by 27.8% already. So a number of agricultural products were originally not classified as essential services during the alert level 5 lockdown, and then interrupted, and were interrupted until the May the 1st when the alert level 4 regulations kicked in. These included wool, cotton, mohair, and wine. And then since then, we've seen that wine and tobacco industries are really in trouble, and actually all the alcohol industries, some that are also derived from agriculture. So this is putting enormous pressure on those value chains, and we are in engagement with government to see what we can do. But we saw on Sunday evening, or this past Sunday, that the ban on alcohol is going to have a very detrimental effect. So exports of our agricultural products generally have now been allowed. Port capacity has been a major problem, especially in Cape Town, where the labor situation was badly hit by COVID and caused a lot of problems within that environment. Cape Town is probably still working only at 60% of capacity, but it's in the peak season for our exports of fruit, especially citrus at the moment. Table grapes has been done, but pears and apples, etc., still going out. So there is some concern as to whether the global demand for our exports will remain as vibrant as they have been over the past couple of years amid the shutdowns and economic distress in various countries. But it's variable across products. Mostly your fruits and your healthy products, there is still a high demand as the consumer is looking to build up his immune system through vitamin C, etc. And then also into Africa, our demand for our maize, both white and yellow, also yellow into other countries, is very high at the moment, and quite a lot is going out on the back of the good crop. Then also we've seen a decline in local demand for food through the informal market disruption. Approximately 40% of our food goes into the informal market and is distributed and sold through the informal market sector. Also, the closure of restaurants and the QSRs, the quick service restaurants, impacted very negatively on the demand for food. And we sat with surpluses for a while. Fortunately, some of the restaurants are open and most of the QSRs are open. So there's a better balance now again in supply and demand locally. If we look at South Africa's agricultural imports, exports, and our trade balance, and this is very important because we're a net exporter. If you just look at the green line, that's the difference between the exports and the imports of agricultural products. You can clearly see from 2007 onwards, the green line is on an upward trajectory, showing increased surplus, trade surplus in terms of agricultural products. We export roughly $10 billion worth of agricultural products. Roughly now 170 billion rands worth of agricultural products. That is very sizable and is recognized by government as such. But we also import roughly 6 billion US dollars worth of agricultural products. So we have a net trade balance of roughly 4 billion US dollars. This is in real terms. In other words, this does not take rand depreciation into effect. And so agriculture is also viewed with new eyes, if I may say so, by government in terms of not just the food security aspect, but also the economic aspect and the contribution to balance of payments. If we look where we are exporting to, we can look at the different destinations. And then if we look at the exports from 2001 to 2009, we can see that Europe was our preferred destination. But since 2009, Africa has become our preferred destination, and that is because of what we call the so-called supermarket phenomenon. That is where ShopRite, Checkers, and Spar, and Woolworths, and Pick n Pay all moved into Africa and took a lot of product with them into Africa around 2009. But this tapered off and has been very flat since then. So we have to look at other markets as well. But we must still say that Africa is our biggest destination. Roughly 45% of our exports go out to Africa. And this may increase too with the new African Continental Free Trade Agreement that has been reached. Okay, so we do see just in the last few years that our exports to Europe are increasing again, especially into the Netherlands and Germany, and then also into the UK. And with the UK leaving the EU through Brexit, that might even create more opportunities in the process. But our biggest opportunity probably lies in Asia, and you can see the blue line, the strong upward trend in the blue turquoise line. And we believe that this is where we also have to put a lot of focus on developing markets for South African agricultural produce. I did mention Africa. The one problem that we do foresee in Africa is that your GDP per capita growth is going to decline very strongly. That is the blue line, and will go into negative figures. So your spending power on food, which is already a large percentage of total household income, is going to decline. But we still see a healthy demand for our maize and even fruit, apples especially, into Africa. And we are looking to see how we can open more of those markets into Africa. So Africa does create some opportunity, but not. It also has its restrictions, especially in terms of household income to spend on food. There are also other impacts and developments on South African agriculture that are noteworthy and that we have to consider. The first one is that the South African Reserve Bank cut interest rates by a cumulative 275 basis points since the beginning of the year. That alone means a saving of roughly 4 billion rand in interest for farmers alone over a 12-month period. And we believe that interest rates will probably remain in that frame for the next 12 months. So that's welcome relief for the whole sector, for the farming sector, but also for the agro-processing sector and other role players in the value chain that are highly leveraged or have debt. We've also seen the department's ring-fencing 1.2 billion for 15,000 small-scale farmers. That does bring some household food security contribution to the small-scale farmers and some relief to them. The problem is also the impacts of the downgrade to sub-investment grade for South African agriculture. The transmission effects bring greater volatility and also have an impact on the agribusiness confidence as it deteriorates. So the attraction for capital to be invested in the sector does decline. Furthermore, the land bank default has holds significant systemic risks for South African agriculture, also for the further up and down the value chain, as it holds 29% of South Africa's farm debt, which is roughly about 200 billion rand in total. The exposure of land bank is in the region of 45 billion rand. So we do foresee a liquidity crunch in agriculture. There is a capital scarcity, which is a concern. And especially in the development sector, we have to work harder to bring more new farmers and emerging farmers into production and also into the value chain, is that the capital available for development is going to be under pressure, which is not good news for South Africa. And we have to develop systems like blended finance to address those. So if we look at our engagement with governments, there have been various structures that have been put up to serve as platforms for engagements. The first one was just before lockdown. The Minister of the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Minister Didiza, developed the COVID-19 response task team. They created 3 work streams: the economic work stream, the social impact work stream, and the communications work stream. I was asked to head up the economic work stream, and what we did was to develop a tracker, what we call an end-to-end value chain tracker system with BFAP, and BFAP then implemented this at the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy and submitted numerous reports, initially every 48 hours, to both Minister Didiza and Minister Patel, that they could take these into the National COVID Command Center so that we could see exactly where the pressure points or the problems were going to be, the disruptions in supply chains, etc. And these reports were very useful in guiding government on bringing the right interventions to make sure that food was still being produced, was being processed, was being distributed, and was being made available to everybody. But yes, sure, there were a number of hiccups that we had to address, especially in the informal food sector. Then also a second response or platform was through Business for SA. And Business for SA is an initiative between Business Unity South Africa, where I also serve on the board, but also with the Black Business Council and also with the Public-Private Growth Initiative of Roelfme and Johan van Zyl. And we were very involved in that as well. So we served on the Economic Interventions Working Group, looking at essential services, supply chain security, infrastructure and logistics, because those were the issues that were the hardest hit by the lockdowns, movement of people, movement of food, etc. So we first had to look initially at our responses to the COVID lockdown measures, how we ensure that supply chain security is manifested and that infrastructure and logistics works. And then secondly, the major focus lately has been on the economic recovery strategy, and I'm going to deal with that a little bit in more detail just now. Then we also have a development project that we've launched with the Office of the Gauteng Premier, Premier David Makura, and this is around small and medium-sized enterprises, and is developing the township economy, because we really have underestimated how big the informal sector is. Just for example, roughly 50% of fresh produce sold on the Johannesburg fresh produce market goes to bakkie traders that service the street vendors, the hawkers, etc., spaza shops in townships, etc. 60% of bread goes out through the informal market. 30% of broiler production is sold as live fowls that goes into the informal market. And we can carry on with this. So it's very important that we use the opportunity to formalize those small and medium-sized enterprises, give them the necessary support to function more efficiently, which creates access to food to so many more people in the process. So this is not a food aid issue. This is more of a business development, entrepreneurship development program that we are doing with PPGI and the Office of the Gauteng Premier and various commodity organizations that are involved in this, the South African Poultry Association, Potato South Africa, the fresh produce organizations, etc. Right then, we've also had very many bilateral engagement with ministers and senior government officials from AgBeside itself, where they've asked for opinions on various matters that have been affected during the lockdown situation. Just to touch on the components of food security, food availability in South Africa is generally not the problem. we're producing enough food. We actually net exporters, especially of many staple major value chains like red meat, like maize, fruits, etc. The problem is food access and affordability. There are way too many people in South Africa, poor people that don't have access, economic and physical access to food, and can't afford food because they have lost their jobs. Unemployment at 29% and rising very fast just doesn't enable people to can buy food. So that is where our Achilles heel is. And then obviously we still have to look at food safety and food quality in the process. In other words, your nutritional standards, your protein quality, food safety, etc. So food security is a complex of many aspects with four major elements: food availability, access, affordability, and quality and safety. And then you've also got the stability over time element. So it's difficult to measure, but we do measure it through the Global Food Security Index. We actually rank the highest in Africa, and our food security generally is deemed to be pretty good. But by far, our biggest problem is access to food, both on economic and physical points, and we have to address that. Right, then the way forward for South African agriculture. And we have to frame the way forward for South African agriculture in terms of what's going to happen in the economy, because a number of people are going to lose their jobs. Employment might go as high as 50%. People are not going to have money to spend on food. How do we frame South African agriculture in terms of creating new markets, as our markets, our global export markets, might also be compromised in the process? So there are huge challenges that face us, and we need to look at South African agriculture and agribusiness in a holistic manner going forward. So what we've been doing is through Business for SA, we've been, we've been looking at how do we position ourselves. But we first need to, before even COVID-19, we were looking to reposition agriculture through the PPGI process with the president. It actually started in August 2018 when I did a presentation to him on the valuable asset that South African agriculture is to South Africa and society. And the president had then, and government then launched the issue of master plans, a master plan initiative. And I want to quote what he said at the Investment Summit in November 2019, because this encapsulates what we were busy with before the COVID. But now COVID is obviously just speeding up this process. So he said we are on a path of removing impediments and constraints to inclusive growth. Very important, inclusive growth becomes the mantra of the initiative. We have embarked on a path that is illuminated by policy consistency and regulatory certainty, fiscal responsibility, and decisive interventions to stimulate economic activity. Central to our efforts to ignite growth and create jobs is an ambitious, execution-oriented industrial strategy founded on partnerships between government, labor, and industry. And then obviously one of the priority areas is agriculture and agro-processing. So master plans will be developed to ensure that infrastructure, skills, incentives, and other resources are directed to where they have the greatest impact. Already, master plans have been signed up for the poultry and the clothing, textile, and footwear industries, also the sugar industry that we are aware of that is close to agriculture. So we have been busy with this process, and it has been a bit of a to and fro process, but we are fully on the process of the master plan initiative. BFAP have a contract, and together with the NAMC, they are doing deep dives into the different value chains in the process. So a template has been developed, which was initiated towards the end of last year, looking at the sector profile, the baseline data, mapping of value chain players, doing a SWOT analysis, high-level indicative priorities that have to be developed in institutional and governance responsibilities, because we've made a lot of plans in agriculture already, but the implementation always remains a big problem. So you need a proper monitoring and evaluation system to make sure that what is decided on gets implemented. Right, then we get to the Business for SA initiative on the new inclusive economic future for South Africa. And really, this is a major blueprint for economic recovery, because we have been hit very hard. We are probably going to drop roughly 10% in GDP this year alone, and it will take us at least 4 years to get back to the point of where we were in 2019. So we do need a strong recovery plan, and we have to be part of that plan. So we have worked very closely with some of the top minds in the South African economy to draft this. The information I'm going to provide to you is just a snapshot of the total presentation. The whole presentation is over 120 slides. The whole plan is over 1,000 pages. But I want to give you a sense of what we are trying to achieve, both from the broader economy, but also from agriculture. The slides are busy, but I will just highlight the major important points on those slides. All this information is available on the Business for SA website, in any case, if you want to go into more detail. So if we look at a new inclusive economic future, the COVID crisis and the partnership created to respond provides an opportunity to rethink South Africa's future. And we have to rethink South Africa's future. We're not in a sustainable environment as we are at the moment. So COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on our already weak economy. So we need a compelling and a stable environment to attract investment and drive growth and employment. And it will require a social and economic compact between all partners with a focus on shared prosperity. In other words, between government, labor and business, we need to decide on how we are going to implement a plan that works. So we want to build a bridge basically between South Africa in 2020 and South Africa in 2030, where we have a GDP outlook currently of 330 billion US dollars. We want to take that to 550 billion US dollars. That is ambitious. Currently, our debt to GDP is 82% and climbing steadily, and projections are even that it will go over 100%, and that makes our interest payments a huge part of our budget every year, and that's not sustainable. We've got to bring that to 60% and lower. Our S&P rating is BB negative. We've got to get it to BBB positive. We've got to get to a positive investment rating. Otherwise, we are not going to attract the capital that we need to rebuild the economy. And that capital will have to come from outside. We don't have that capital in South Africa any longer. Our Gini coefficient is of the highest in the world at 63, and we've got to bring that down to 43. Gini coefficient measures is a measure of your inequality in your country. And a country that is as unequal as ours is not a stable society. Unemployment is currently 29%. We've got to bring that down to 15%. Business confidence is at an all-time low. On a scale of 1 to 100, it's at 5. So there's very little confidence. We have to get that up to 70. Global competitiveness, as measured by the World Economic Forum, is at 60 out of 141 countries. We've got to get that within the top 25. And then ease of doing business, which the World Bank looks at, we rated 84 out of 190 countries. We've got to bring that down into the top 20 out of 190 countries if we want to make South Africa an attractive destination for investment and grow the economy. So we need an unambiguous, compelling new narrative focused on inclusive economic growth. The inclusive economic growth, again, comes out very strongly. And we've got to persuade investment to come to South Africa. So we've got to create the right environment. Okay, so we need to work together to tackle the constraints and the challenges and deliver an inclusive, accelerated economic recovery. So we've got to look at pre- and post-COVID opportunities, a new social compact on inclusive growth. We've got to look at investment infrastructure. We've got to look at rapid acceleration of small, medium, and sized enterprises, unlocking sector opportunities, digital economy acceleration, and a new global paradigm. because we must address, firstly, policy uncertainty, state capability and capacity, which is really at an all-time low. Inequality and transformation in BE, we have to relook BE. It's got to be more broad-based. It's got to be cheap. It costs us too much, and it is too politically connected. We've got to be more efficient with our SOEs, and we've got to get rid of redundant SOEs. Innovation, entrepreneurship, and education outcomes have to improve, and then definitely corruption and crime must be stopped. And this becomes a massive challenge. So what is required to drive this fundamental change is unlock SMMEs, is accelerate economic transformation, attract capital to deliver inclusive growth, greater policy certainty, and agree on key national projects and policy interventions, effective and timely implementation via appropriate capacitated resources. So this is not so easy. So where does agriculture fit in this? If we look at our key priorities, we need national initiatives and policy interventions that will create certainty and enable more inclusive growth. So your job enablers and activators are your energy security and green energy transition, transport and logistics, your ICT connectivity, unlocking agriculture, and unlocking agriculture especially is also developing your water infrastructure and maximizing commercial agricultural output. Government doesn't have a fight with commercial agriculture. They want to enhance agriculture as well. And enhance localization, which also helps us because we can produce more. We can bring in greater protection, for example, our poultry industry and other industries, perhaps wheat industry as well, so that we can enhance those sectors where we can then use substitute imports. And then access to finance is obviously going to be a critical role in the sector. So there are different projects and initiatives to drive this. Also on a policy focus area, if we look at agriculture, obviously one of the main areas is that point 5, clarity on land reform. We also have to look at SOE reform because those impact also on the agricultural space. So this is a huge challenge, and we have to see it holistically and where we fit into the energy, the water issues, the land reform issues, telecoms issues, financial inclusion and fiscal support. And business can help to address the economic challenges in South Africa, working in partnership, obviously, with government, labor and communities. The state should guide strategic initiatives and provide an enabling environment with policy certainty and consistency. And business should focus on sourcing skills and capital and investing in projects and initiatives to create growth and jobs. And in agriculture, we actually have a number of sectors that are still growing robustly. If we look at especially your fruit sectors, big sectors, even our maize sector is still growing. So there are many sectors in agriculture that are still growing, and we must enhance these with the right policy and the right support mechanisms. So what are the immediate actions that will improve consumer and business confidence and require no policy changes in agriculture? The first most important one is backstop emergency farm financing and providing support to the land bank. Because the land bank holds such a huge percentage of agricultural debt, we must make sure that the land bank remains operational and supports the businesses and the farmers to ensure that the crops can be harvested, firstly, and secondly, and paid for those crops, and secondly, that they can then purchase the necessary inputs, including fertilizer, for the new crop. So stabilizing the financing in agriculture is a major priority, and that Minister Tito Mboweni has already provided 3 billion assistance to the land bank. They are in the process of acquiring another 3 billion in the process to stabilize the operations. Sure, there will have to be restructuring of the land bank, but that is more in the medium to long term. Obviously, there are many other areas that have to be addressed in energy and water, mining, construction, manufacturing, and agro-processing is also part of manufacturing, and agro-processing is now already 25% of total manufacturing. Right, then, very busy slide. I'm not going to go into into the detail here, but you will just again see that agriculture features in a major way in the overall picture of getting the economy to grow and to create jobs. So on that table on the left-hand side, there are a number of agricultural industries like the citrus industry and various others, which are high potential growth and have a high ranking. This is even pre-COVID. And we believe that we can leverage of practically all the sectors of agriculture to get high industry focus areas. So the high industry focus areas, this ranking of 1 to 10 is not in a ranking situation. It's just in terms of firstly your resources, then your industrial capacity, which includes construction, manufacturing, transport, then your services and support, because agriculture is a support into the food industry, and financial service, telecommunications, tourism and leisure. And then that obviously goes into wholesale, retail, and then also into your export industry. So just to say how agriculture features in this whole plan. Now, the plans that we have been making are obviously not done in isolation. We also look at government plans. We've looked at the National Development Plan of 2012 or the 2030 National Development Plan. We've looked at the Job Summit outcomes. We've looked at the Supplementary Budget Review, National Treasury Economic Reform Paper, to which we made comments, the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, where Wandile Sishobe, our chief economist, sits on, Industrial Policy Action Plan, the Integrated Resource Plan, that's for energy, the South African Reserve Bank Industry Analysis. So there are various government documents that we also looked at in the process, and obviously there's a high level of convergence. We don't agree on everything, but at least there is strong convergence on building a partnership that can make us go forward to create policy consistency, regulatory reform, address crime and corruption, infrastructure investment, SOE optimization, energy industrialization strategy, economic transformation, and BEE, skill shortages that we must address, and then modernization investment. Okay, then I want to get a bit more to the agriculture sector, overview of the agriculture sector. I think I've got about 3 slides on this, just overarching. There's a whole agricultural presentation of over 60 slides, which I can make available to you. But obviously the key sector objectives is contribute to GDP. We've got to get growth going. We've got to boost employment, and we've got to ensure food security and national outcomes. The categories that we are looking at is sector and market analysis and the impact of COVID. So if we look at criteria, resilience, we have a resilient sector in the face of economic shocks, often counter-cyclical. As we see now, it's growing positively by 10%, while the economy is tanking by 10%. Economic growth of a nature makes the sector make resource allocation flexible based on factors on the demand and supply, and export demand generally benefits from declining South African rand. So our security, economic performance is pretty secure, although we are subject to droughts and diseases. Job creation potential is high, so your multiplier effects are very good. Yes, we have had some job loss quarter on quarter, but we are still a higher employer on a year-on-year basis. So in terms of where we are now, where we were in 2019, we have more jobs in agriculture than what we had in 2019. So pretty secure in terms of job creation. Supply and demand has been impacted, especially in the informal sectors, and especially through changed consumer demand. So we need to look at that, and we need to see how this is going to impact on agriculture, how we have to look for new markets also globally. Infrastructure plays a massive role, especially road to rail that we have to bring in, and then obviously our port situation. So if we look at the key challenges, there are 5 main structural constraints that we have to look into. And I'm not going to go into them all, but the first one is access to finance. And this is general access to finance, but includes the financial sustainability of the land bank. And we need to use some state funds to implement the blended finance models that we have been developing over the past 3 or 4 years. Land reform is very important around redistribution. Get those farms that have been brought into production. Restitution, tenure rights, especially in the former homeland areas, and then expropriation without compensation is a key inhibitor to future investment and creates too many uncertainties. And so we have, obviously, this is one point where we disagree with government. We have said that it's not an enabler for growth and investment. Then also on water infrastructure, delayed water infrastructure in projects, and I'm thinking of the lifting the dam walls of the Clanwilliam Dam, the Letaba Dam, or the Tsenin Dam. There are various projects that have been delayed where we need water infrastructure for expanding irrigation in agriculture and thus production. Also, our administrative processes around water are not good. We need to address these. Transport infrastructure, especially around the ports, is a major problem. Also, road to rail is a major problem. And it's not just the infrastructure that's a problem, it's also the operational inefficiency in the ports, which is below par and below global standards, and we need to improve that. And there are various measures for that. And then lastly, one that I think is probably really critical is access to new markets. Because our markets are saturated, we overproduce in South Africa, we're a net exporter, we have to look for new markets, and you have to work hard. It's got to be a public-private partnership. We've got to use the institutional capacity that we have, and we need better coordination between the sector and the Department of Agriculture, and specifically DTI and DIRCO, to make sure we access new markets globally. This really, because it all starts with the market. If we don't have those markets, we can't produce, and we've got to create the pool for this value chain by developing these markets. So if we get our priority actions in place, we can grow jobs by roughly 60 to 80,000 per annum. We can increase agriculture GDP by 10 to 15 billion rand per annum. We can increase tax revenue by 3 to 4 billion rand per annum, and we can improve the nutritional outcomes. But we need to then maximize commercial agricultural output, improve access to finance, investment in enabling infrastructure, commitment to transformation, and global trade optimization. So there are a couple of immediate actions we can take. There are a couple of long-term or immediate actions we can take. There are a couple of medium-term actions we can take, 6 to 24 months, and then longer-term, 2 to 5 years. I'm not going to go into all these details. You are welcome to have a look at the slides, but they are basically on the issues that I have already mentioned to you. We've just trying to phase them in, that it makes sense in terms of what are the immediate gains that we have, then medium to longer term, and then longer term. These are very important. So the take-home message that I want to leave you with is basically that South Africa still has a very resilient and a robust agro-food, agro-beverage, agro-fibre system that is a major asset to our country in terms of national food security. And you and your sector play a very important role in that. You must never underestimate that importance. COVID-19 has exposed some fault lines and vulnerability in certain value chains that need to be addressed, including infrastructure and logistics. That's in the ports, but that's also our distribution mechanisms into the informal markets, where we really need to invest a lot more and develop those enterprises. The informal market system needs to be developed, no doubt about that. We've underestimated it ourselves. We need to enhance that with government. We need to bring more people in to make it more inclusive, so that we have inclusive growth in the process. There's still a lot of uncertainty around the pandemic and its eventual impact on local and global markets, and thus on the demand side of agricultural value chains, both locally and globally. So we are monitoring that all the time, advising businesses as to where to look for opportunities and how to optimize those markets. it's very important that you stay in touch with developments. Obviously, we have our weekly newsletter going out. We have a daily market report going out to our members. Every Monday, we have a government gazette going out, or a summary of the government gazettes going out. There are so many changes, and we're writing in the media every day, advising our members as well as industry on how things are changing, what to expect, how we must adapt. So it's probably going to be business as usual going forward. It's a changed environment, and it will take us quite a while to get back to where we were pre-COVID. So the message is buy into this plan, support this plan, and be part of the future of South African agriculture. I thank you.